Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another buddy webinar. Today, we are going to talk about why your documentation sucks and we'll try to fix it. I have a true expert when it comes to documentation. Together with me, I have Milana Zap. Milana, tell us a few words about yourself.
Well, I'm classical musician by default, by education. And I was also working as a classical musician for 10 years. Development was a fun hobby. And then it was more easy to live from development, so I switched. And documentation is probably my OCD, wanting to have everything structured. So I started with the WordPress documentation in 2011 and never stopped. So here we are. I'm right now a WordPress engineer at XWP and one of WordPress documentation team representatives.
And my name is Maciek Palmowski. I work here at Bali as a WordPress ambassador, and I am your, I hope, favorite webinar host. Let's start with a small summary of what we learned today. So first of all, we will learn what does it mean to have a well-documented project, how to write and maintain documentation in a project, and what tools can we use to automate some parts of it. Also, remember, if you like what we are doing, don't forget to press the subscribe button on YouTube. You will be informed about all of our upcoming webinars, and you will have a chance to watch all of those that we recorded in more than a year already. And if you have any questions regarding documentation, don't hesitate and ask it in the comments. We will try to answer as more as possible in the Q&A section in the end. Okay, so Milana, let's start with what does it mean to have a well-documented project? Because I think it's a bit more than just writing one or two commands inside of our PHP or JS file.
Well, it's a lot. It's a lot more than people think. So if we take WordPress as an example, there is code reference, and that is one piece of the puzzle that is very important, but it doesn't tell you much when you start. And that's a huge problem to people when start. So next to code reference, you have to have some kind of tutorials and how-tos. But also, and there is a specific system how to write all that and how that should look, and how to is not the same as tutorial or guide. And then there is manual, so how to use this software. And we have at WordPress.org, we have end user documentation, we have developer documentation, but both of those are mostly what we would call manual, just explaining what is there and how to utilize. Then we have code reference, which is automated, which is the only way you should do code reference. And we have a new platform, learn.wordpress.org or learning.wordpress.org. This is embarrassing.
I think it's learn. It's learn.
It's probably, well, it's either. And this platform is creating guides and tutorials and lesson plans. So all of that is development. And also important thing is to note that as the software is never completed, documentation is never completed. So everything is in process, more or less out of date. But those are different components of documentation. And also there are other things like when you have meeting agendas and meeting summaries, that's documentation. When you go to grocery and you have your shopping list, that's documentation. When you have your little post-it note with, things you have to do, that's documentation. So a lot of it is documentation, and software documentation needs those four things. So it's manual, it's code reference, it's guides, and how-tos.
Yeah, so it sounds a bit difficult to
It
create,
is.
difficult to maintain. Just like that. It is, right?
It
So
is. Yeah,
it's
it is.
yeah, because I mean, this is one of the most often hear the things against the project, that the documentation just sucks. It's out of date or something like this. So
Yeah, yeah, but you will
uh,
also hear developers like, "Oh, I don't write documentation. Like, I'm a developer." Really? And who has time for writing documentation? So nobody likes actually to write documentation, and that's why we have so many badly documented projects.
and this is the thing I wanted to ask you next. What do you think about the self-explanatory code? Because this is quite often a thing that we can
Yeah,
hear, that we don't have to write documentation. Our code is self-explanatory. I mean,
yeah, that's a
I
joke.
under, I understand that there are some cases, especially when we started to using types in PHP. And for example, we have, I don't know, like project ID, and we know that it's an integer. I mean, adding documentation that it's a project identifier. Do you
Well,
think it? Mhm.
the self-documented code is maybe uh, something that you can say, well, we have well documented code, so we don't need that much detailed code reference, but that's only code reference. If you
Mhm.
take a look at code reference, it doesn't tell you where to put that code. It just tells you what it has, what it returns. It doesn't tell you anything else. There is no context. So it is just a list, a catalog of functions and methods and classes that exist there. So it's not enough for a developer. Even today, after working as a developer for over a decade, I go and some functions that I use for years, I'm not sure if I need a post ID as a parameter, like when you have get the content or the content, or get the title. Does it go like the excerpt? Does it go post ID, post object, or does it take
Mhm.
anything? So those things are very simple. I know how to use that function. I know where to put it, but I just don't know what is the order of parameters, or which parameters there are. But I don't. I already have this knowledge how to use it and where to put it, and that's something you don't get by looking at code
Mhm.
reference. So yeah, well documented code, well structured code, it's good, it's great. It will help developers who come after you, so they don't want to kill you and hunt you down. And it will help you when you go back a few months later and take a look at it. uh, but I'm still not convinced that you shouldn't put some documentation in there as well.
Mhm.
And besides that, documentation about how to use this code.
Okay, yeah. So you stand that it's always better to add a bit more documentation rather than
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
in short. Okay, okay. So um, how do you think the perfect flow when you create a project and write the documentation to it should look like? Should we first write the code and add the documentation later, or
That will
how does
never
it look like?
happen. We all know that's a
Oh
lie.
yeah,
So
yeah, I know. I
everything
mean,
we
I have so many projects that are waiting for this later,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, everything we want to add later never happens. especially if it's not vital for product, if the product is software. So what I'm trying to start at WordPress.org is to have a new workflow where developer would get a dedicated documentarian uh, who would ask questions along the development process. You know, what is this? What you put here? How do you use it? And then create some code examples. And that's exactly how documentation should be written along the way while you are developing. You should document and you should think about things, not just code reference. As I said, that should be automated. You should never think about code reference. It should always be up to date with the latest version, and that is not possible if you do it manually. So that has to be automated. But you should think about code examples. What are edge cases? How? So those are the things that are specifically very much needed when you release the code. And that's something we have in WordPress releases when we publish dev notes. That's where you will find how to use that. And that's very important. But I would really love to have that, somewhere else because dev notes are in blog and then you lost it after several releases. So I would love to have a place where I can go and find all those examples that are really great and those explanations, where you would use that function, how you
Mhm.
would use it, what you can use it for, all those things. And that should be done while developing. So when it's fresh, when your function is completed for now, you should have that documented. Uh, it doesn't need to be so when you write code and then you think, oh, now I have to document. No, just put some items. It doesn't have to have nice words there, but it has to make sense for
Mhm.
you, and you can then add or talk to a documentarian who knows how to add nice words. So this is also a problem for developers. Like, I don't know how to write documentation. Well, you don't have to write everything by yourself. Just put items there, what's happening, how you do it, put code example, and then documentarian will wrap it up and make a nice structure of it and then
Mhm.
present it. So it should be done during development, and you should never ever release code that is not documented.
Yeah. So in short, write code, at least write some simple sentences. What is happening right
Yeah,
now?
yeah. And if you do it
And
every day, like one paragraph, this is it, you will see that after a while you will have a nice page of everything documented.
mhm. Yeah, and just so overall, before the documentation should be a normal part of development. When we are releasing new code, if the documentation isn't finished or it's incomplete, maybe even it's just incomplete, you can't release the code
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it's not ready. Yeah, I
yeah.
understand. So mm, we already talked about a few of them, but what are the most important practices when it comes to creating a good documentation,
Hmm. I don't think there
apart
are,
from writing?
apart from writing, I don't think there are practices. It really depends um, on your audience, on what you are documenting. Every project, if we are talking about open source, every project has their own way how to do things. And in open source, people start doing what they know. So in WordPress, we had a lot of change of tools and workflows, and it's never ending. And while you are trying to figure things out, the software went out and you didn't document it. So those are things that depend on a lot of uh, uh, other things that have no uh, connection to documentation itself. Uh, I guess the only way that I could say that is a very good practice is the fact that best documentation is written by people who are using it. So that's kind of difficult to understand. If I'm going to use it, if I need that documentation, how can I write it? Because I don't know. Uh, uh, I need documentation to understand what's happening. So this is like making a bridge between people who know what's happening and people who don't know. So they need to communicate because when people know what's happening, it's easy for them to just skip some very important parts. And we had that in Gutenberg documentation because
Oh
it was
yes.
initially written by React developers, and then we PHP developers were like, what? What's with this index.js file? Where do I put it? And they are like, so it's your index.js file. Like in React, you know what to do with that. So you have to, talk to each other, ask questions. Uh, when you don't know something, you have to ask questions those people who know, and they will realize just how much documentation is missing there. So this is something we always do with new contributors when they express their desires, where they want to contribute. Then we let them there and try to make sense of it. And the first moment you see no sense in documentation, that's your job. Fill it up, and ask the question so we can find what is the hole. I'm so long in there that I don't see that much problems, but there are so many problems with documentation in WordPress, with structure, with everything, and that's why we need fresh eyes. So that's, I think, the only thing I could say that is the best practice, always having fresh eyes on documentation, especially from people who are using it.
Mhm. Yeah, I fully agree because the problem with those projects that are used by some group of users, they are just used to it, and they
Yeah,
understand the syntax. They understand all the quirks because they added them. But every time when someone new tries to add something, become a contributor,
it's
he
not possible.
realized that
Yeah,
it's not possible because he doesn't understand uh, how it works, and and this is very important for the team that they can either say, okay, you don't understand, go away, find a different project, or they can benefit from learning that their documentation is lacking, that people don't understand, and this may be the biggest problem that prevents the project from growing. Because let's be honest, I could, I mean, I can't imagine using any big CMS because there is a difference between using a small library that I can just go through the code and, okay, I get it. I use this and this. Okay, I get it. And using an enormous project like a CMS because saying that there is a simple CMS. No, that's not true. CMSs will be always complicated. They can look simple, but underneath a lot of things happens.
hmm
And and if we want to document it very well, uh, there just there just isn't a chance for anyone else to understand it. And thanks to this, just such a project will decline very quickly.
yeah,
And
and
I mean,
that's exactly what was happening with Gutenberg. People who understand it, they were writing documentation up to one point, and then even they stopped writing it because they didn't have a time. And the more a project grew, and the more they went into development, it was, less React and more PHP and React. And now
Hmm.
the less people know how to document it, and no one can start contributing because you don't have documentation. You don't know how to learn. So even today, I go to, when I need something to do with block editor, I, for my work, I go to source code and just read how the core did it. That's not how you do it, you know, because uh, uh, maybe that's how you start writing documentation, but that's not how you use documentation when there is none. You go to code, and maybe that's not meant to be used that way in extending. So we have with WordPress this, like how you write WordPress code and how you extend it, and you don't write the same code in plugin as it is in WordPress in core. So when I go and take a look at core and I say, okay, I will try to do it this way, it's maybe working, but maybe that's not meant to be done that way. Maybe there's some filter that is not documented. And you get so frustrated by trying to make things work. You don't have time to get new ideas, to propose a new feature or a new use case, and that's how you don't get any contributors. So we come to a point where good or bad documentation can make or break your project. And a lot of people just didn't use Gutenberg because of this, and then you get no contributors, and then you only have people who work on it and only they know how to use it. That's a bubble you don't want with open source. Especially with open source that is built by this large community, when just they refuse to use it.
Hmm. Yeah, also I would say because I remember when I was reading about everything related to DevRel. And one of the things, all those dev relationships, how we try to connect developers with each other, and mm, one of the things that are very important when it comes to DevRel is the passive part, and the passive part is nothing else than a well-documented project, because this is one of the things that most developers look at first. And I'm doing the same. One of the first things, first I look at the code to check when was the last contribution, is the project active, and the next step is there documentation, are there examples, and without it, I would probably look for something else. And on the other hand, my adventure with WordPress started thanks to the documentation, because it was great at the time. It was great. I think it was one of the best at the time when I started using it. It was like 10 years ago. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Well,
yeah,
it
yeah.
wasn't exactly. There was a lot of it. So there's a difference. Not everything was very good, but there was a lot of it because it was on Wiki, so everybody could edit.
Mhm.
But that's also the worst part of it because everybody could edit, and that's why we moved it to WordPress.
Yeah, and this is because this is also kind of interesting. Documentation, as we already mentioned, writing it is one of the dreadful things that developers do. They mostly don't like it, and for some reason, you decided to to have documentation as one of your most important things when it comes to your career. Why? Because
Well,
this. Mhm.
because this is the way to learn. So I'm purely selfishly in documentation because I want to be informed about everything that is new, about how things are done in WordPress, how things should be done in WordPress. And when you spend a lot of time there in documentation, so this was my hobby. I was having WordPress in local and just doing what I found in different tutorials. I built this Frankenstein in my local, and I was reading documentation because I wanted to. So this was just for myself, to understand what's happening. And then I would find something in my local WordPress that wasn't documented, or it was wrong document. I mean, it was out of date. So I was like, what? So I had to fix that. And I fixed that. And then after a while, I was searching for something and found my own code example in WordPress documentation. And then I said, oh, well, this is my notebook to myself. So this is why I'm doing it, to have everything when I need it, but also in order to put it there. When you try to write just one paragraph of documentation, you have to know like a ton behind it. You have to be certain what you are uh, uh, talking about. You have to know in depth what is this function doing, what it returns. You have to be certain in that, and that's like behind one paragraph. There's hours of testing, and that was really interesting to me. So I had to do some serious development to be able to document. And I was also able to do some serious development because there was documentation. So this is the circle that just keeps me inside. It's
Hmm.
interesting to me. I guess um, I'm not a gamer, but I guess that's how gamers feel like, when they get to another stage and another. So this is my game, like going in circles, learning something new, finding out something that is not documented. Oh my God. And I will be the first one to put it there. And then, yes, and then I will find it a couple of months later and I will need it. And other people will, you know, comment on that, and I would say, "Oh, that's what I wrote," and I spent my whole weekend, writing that and figuring it out. And that's something you never forget. Like development you do while writing documentation is something you don't forget. It's not like copy paste from, Stack Overflow. So it's just purely, selfish to be better developer and to know exactly what can be done with WordPress. You cannot
Hmm.
have that many projects to know every piece of it. And I'm not saying I know every piece of it, but I know where to look. I know who to
Hmm.
ask, and and a lot of it, I know what's new, what's happening, where it goes. So I'm kind of having all those informations, and we all know information is power. So
Hmm. And so, how would you? I mean, for example, how would you try to convince a person that thinks that documentation isn't needed in his project? How would you try to convince him? Yeah, start doing it.
um, hmm. Well, I would suggest this person to um, find a way to offer this project to be used by other developers and just see the comments, see the feedback. So what you
Hmm.
will get when you don't have documented project, you are actually uh, only can only work with people who are just like you. Now, there are developers who like to work with other developers who are just like them, uh, like knowing, understanding the structure and the code from the code, not needing anything. But that's a good way to not move anywhere, to have
Hmm.
like-minded people, and the diversity in backgrounds, in way of thinking, in uh, experiences and knowledge is exactly what makes the project good. So you get a lot of proposals, you get a lot of ideas. Many of them are really not something you want to do, but you expand, or you get new idea for another project, and you get new contributors, people you cannot know, you cannot know everything how to do good. But there are people who are very good in project management. There are people who are good in documentation. There are people who are good in different, you cannot be just a developer and have successful project. We all saw that that's not gonna work. You need a lot of other skills, and you don't have that, and it's completely okay not to have that. But you can have those skills with other people, and those people have to be different from you. And for them to be different from you, you have to give everything you possibly can. So complete documentation. I would dare to say that documentation is equally important as code. Even though we don't have
Mhm.
software without code, but we also don't have any movements in software without documentation. So I would say they are equally important.
Yeah, that's true, because the lack of documentation is just like closing your
Yeah.
code inside of some walls that no one
You
will
you and your
understand.
buddies have a project.
Or only
Or
you,
only
because
you.
you are the only person who understand what is
Yeah.
happening here. I mean, probably after 2 or 3 months, no one is, because
But also
yeah.
there is
Mhm.
another thing, when you document, you actually, that is something what rubber ducking is. You actually think through the project again, and you find bugs. I've been finding bugs in my own code while trying to document everything for clients, to teach them how to use it, or when I record videos, how to use this functionality that I have built. So many bugs I found during that and fixed. And that's what makes you to really rethink everything, to get a better picture where you want this to go. When you just write code, it's
Mhm.
so easy to stop creating issues, to stop doing any of those things that make you stop and think, and you just throw the code there, and then somebody wants to help you and you say, "Oh no, don't do that because I need to do that." So you actually do that just for yourself. You don't
Mhm.
open your project to anyone else. And that's okay if you want to have that project.
Just for
Yeah,
yourself, because
yeah,
it's
yeah,
perfectly okay.
yeah.
So uh, yeah, because this is I think this is also very important to say that while the code is crucial, because without the code we won't have a project. But the one thing that you said about documentation, that while writing it you found some bugs, I think that another thing that is also equally useful is writing tests. So writing
Yeah,
tests and documentation together. Yeah, because as you said, those are those rubber ducks. Those are those rubber ducks that will help you. Then that when you will start writing something, it's like talking with this duck, or a friend, because some people need a live
or
a
your
live rubber
kid.
duck,
Yeah,
or your kid. Yes, yes. and and thanks to this we can find those bugs without even pushing it publicly, because while documenting we will see that, okay, it's so hard to document. I think I know why, because it's un, it's written in a bad way. We created the code in a bad way, so it's hard to document. The same goes with test. If it's difficult to test your code, it means the code is probably written in a bad way. It should be fixed. It should be
yeah,
easier to make it testable. So yeah, we can also say that your code should be documentable, because it's almost the
exactly,
same, like
exactly.
with testable code. And tell me, which documentation from the projects you use, you like, you see as one of the best? Maybe a few examples.
Well,
So, if someone would like to learn those best practices of how the documentation should look like, where they should try to find it.
there is one example that I always go to. So Gatsby.js has one page says getting started. And I was on vacation and it was 2019. Everybody was talking about uh, Gatsby and how good it is and everything. And mind you, I have never wrote a line of code in React before. So I was on holiday, and what do you do when you're a developer on holiday? You just, test few little things. And I said, okay, so I have time now. I will check what this Gatsby is all about. And I went to their website, and when website is leading you where to go, where to look, what are the steps, that was beautiful. So I didn't have to look to really dig and find developer documentation. So there was the page getting started, and it's just one pager. I
Mhm,
started with having no idea what React code looks like. I did use a lot of terminal tools and CLIs before, so I know that part. It wasn't new for me, but I started there, and at the end of the page, I had a working Gatsby application, and
mhm,
that's something beautiful when you uh, uh, have this result right away. You have a working code right away after finishing what they meant to be completed. So, code examples were amazing. So simple, but amazing. You get code example, what you have to put there. Then you get another code example. There is only one line different. It's highlighted. Hello, so you know where to look. And not too much in-depth explanations, just as much as you need to understand what's happening. So you have to have this understanding. I had this app that I understand completely. I looked at code and I understand every line of it, but I didn't go through tons of documentation to read. They had links like take a look here if you want to learn more, take a look there. But everything I needed for this app to understand and to have it working, it was there. It wasn't like a lot of work. I don't know. It was 1 hour or 2 hours. I don't know, something like that. It felt like I was just playing with something and I had something built, and that's what made me contribute to their documentation. so, so I did that as well, and I read through all of it. So that is, to me, also another form of documentation. These one pagers that you
mhm,
get complete. That is something similar to how to tutorial when you are focused on a specific problem, how to solve this very specific problem. So that's not explaining in detail and guiding my knowledge and best practices. It's just how to do this step 1, 2, 3, 10, and it's done. Uh, and that is probably the best documentation example I saw until that day. And after that, I see those JavaScript frameworks are really having a good documentation, very well explained, and some even interactive, as we were talking about. That there's the Next.js, and
Next.js, yes.
yeah, JavaScript frameworks are really making this new trends in how to write documentation that will keep you occupied and that will lead you where you should be going, so you don't have to really go and search. So we have that in WordPress, like you have to dig to find, you have to know exactly what you need to be able to find it. And that's bad practice. That's very bad practice. But what we have in WordPress is a lot of documentation, current documentation was just migrated from Codex. So it's a documentation old 15 years, 18 years. So, we cannot really compare it, and we are still struggling to make it more user friendly. But we are so long there, we need fresh eyes. So that's, also the structure needs to be different. Uh, and that's another thing about documentation. It's not just article you write, it's not a story you write, it needs structure. And that's when it gets difficult, how you structure it and make templates of it so that it's recognizable on every new page. So yeah,
And
to go back, yeah, Gatsby was my example.
Gatsby, yeah. And one more question, because you have a chance to work with one of the biggest projects there is, WordPress. And what is the difference working on documentation in WordPress compared to smaller ones? What are the biggest problems in managing such a documentation?
I would say this structure is uh, how do you make this vast software with a lot of things happening? How do you put it on one page? So the landing page for documentation
Mhm.
is how do you give users everything and not overwhelm them? How
Mhm.
to know what is the, and how to actually categorize all that information. So the structure of it, you really need to have I don't know what is the word in English, the bird's perspective of the whole project, and
Mhm.
that's very difficult to have because it is a big project. So you have to have this bird's view, but you also have to know the details, how to structure every of that. So can each part of it have templates, how to structure information. Uh, it's just thinking about it, it's like, and trying to put it all in one place where someone who comes first time can find everything and have lead them to exactly where they should go. It's just structuring it. It's very difficult.
Mhm. Yeah, and in the end, I wanted to show everyone, because you already mentioned that some parts of the documentation should be automated,
Yeah.
like references and everything. And yes, automation is the key. And the cool part is it's not that difficult. It's not that difficult. I think that every bigger language, every more popular language has libraries that are responsible for automation of documentation. I want to show what we can do using PHPDocumentor, because this is one of the standards in PHP. So let me share my screen, and let me zoom in. And as you see, this is the result. This is a simple example that we get with PHPDocumentor, and we got everything. We have everything divided by namespaces. We have all the packages, reports, everything. And of course, no one would do it manual. We have uh, all the constants. We know with which file and which line it's connected. And let's be honest, doing something like this manually, that's impossible. I mean, it is possible, but it would take a lot of time. So if we check at our project, the whole key is this, first of all, this PHP doc XML. And here we see where everything is built, what files are included, which are ignored. And if we look at the files, so for example, let's go into this SRC folder. Let's take a look at the delivery. We see the namespace, we see the commands, we see the constants, we see the comments for those constants and everything. And if we will, because like I said, this is something very simple. We just need to install PHPDocumentor and run the command, because all the configuration is stored in our XML file. So if we will run it and we will deploy it, it will generate all the references just like that. That's it. There is no more magic. So generating references is that simple. And how do you do it in WordPress?
We have, so I could share screen.
Okay.
If you allow me.
Of course.
So here we have, I hope
zoom
you
in a bit?
see.
Yeah, zoom in to
Okay,
100%.
yeah, sorry. So if you take a look at WordPress PHP doc parser, so this is a plugin, and you have here in README file, you have kind of instructions what to do with it. This is what we use in developer documentation, developer WordPress.org reference. So all of this here is.
Could you zoom in a bit?
Sorry.
Oh yeah.
So everything you see here is parsed with that plugin. This has a little bit different configuration because it's using WordPress.org, and it's getting code. Well, I don't know exactly if they're getting from SVN or GitHub, but everything here you see, it's parsed from with this plugin, and so here is name of the function, description, that's all from code, parameters, everything from code, return. More information is created here in WordPress. So this is the specific template that we have at WordPress.org. And it's here, edit explanation. That's how we edit this. But source, now we are back to code. Related info is also parsed from code, used by, description, changelog, that is also from code. And now we have user contributed notes, which are comments. So you see this template is very specific, and it is built for WordPress.org. So it has different parts of it gets from code and different parts from WordPress.org. But there is also this one. So here, reference for AMP plugin. Again, classes, methods, hooks, functions, and you will find here the same thing. So this is just different styling, but it is the same thing. I could find some. Okay, sorry. But you can take a look at that, and you can see how it was implemented here in this repository. It's AMP project, AMP WP, and here you can see docs, and that's how it was added and implemented. So there are a few examples how you can do it. And of course, you can try for your plugin, for your theme, for your project. You can test it out, and if you get stuck, just come to WordPress.org and talk to us.
Mhm.
so so we can, find things that are not working well that we can fix. So you can see here, like, when was this um, updated last time, and the build is failing. So this is kind of, slippery. We are using it only when release is done, and then someone press the button and it collects all the functions and recreate the reference handbook, and that's it. We could use more work, so you know go there, test it, try it with your project. This should work with any project if you configure it properly, and then you can, start working on it and maybe improving it. So
Mhm.
that's all I wanted to show.
Okay, so the last thing we have are the questions from the audience because there are quite a few of them. So let's start with the one we got just before the webinar. How do you keep your documentation up to date when your app is constantly changing?
Well, we already kind of talked about this. So never release code that is not documented. If your app is constantly changing, then put an effort to uh, document it while you develop. Uh, I mean, there is no easy answer. There is no like formula or silver bullet for everything. You just need
Maybe
to.
AI. Maybe AI.
Maybe AI, that would be good. uh, but with app, always, as I said, code reference always should be automated. And uh, if you have a good structure of documentation, then you can just add things here and there. But my advice would be never to release anything new until it's documented, even if that means, postponing release. I would,
Okay.
I would just make it mandatory to not be able to
Mhm.
release until documentation is done.
Okay. So in short, if your app is constantly changing, constantly change your documentation.
Exactly.
Simple as that.
Just
Uh,
understand that documentation is exactly as code, never done. And if there's more code, new code, there has to be more new documentation. It's just is.
it's just that it's that simple, right?
Yeah.
Now let's go with a question from Wale. What are some beginner-friendly tools that you recommend for automating documentation?
Well, yeah, we already show. I don't know if that's beginner friendly, but for automating this one, you can look into different parsers. If you want to play, you can parse things from readme files or change logs, and then just add a few things here and there. Maybe you can parse commit messages. So if you write nice commit messages, and I'm used to write commit message like what is the ticket number and what is the ticket title, and then a nice paragraph, what is done in this commit. So if you there are tools to parse those commit messages, so you can create like a really nice change log that can be then parsed into some paragraphs, and a nice dev note how to use things. So maybe that's something. I think parser is a keyword here. Just parsing different forms of text.
Yes, or just search for name of the language plus automatic documentation
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something like this. I did some small research before it, and you can find it to multiple languages, and most of them are quite simple. I mean, all the parsers are simple. You just have to run a command. The hard part is to write the
What is
docs.
going to be parsed? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, because the parsers are really simple right here.
Yeah,
Marco mentioned the documentation is so important, and we can learn a lot from
exactly.
it, and that is true. And from Adam, how would you connect annotation with documentation automatically? Because annotation is easier to maintain and more important to maintain because of type hints.
Phew. Well, with parsers, it's hmm. I
I mean,
guess if there is no build parser, you should build one.
mhm. Yeah, I mean this is the cool part about most of those libraries that they can be extended. You can
Yeah,
change them to whatever you need. I mean, you can use the vanilla version, and that's okay. It will work. It will work, and for I think that even for most projects it will be more than enough. But sometimes you have to add something more. So that's it. Sometimes you just have to add something. And this is from Victor. In case of docs, the target audience is very important. Docs for mixed audience is very hard to read for professionals and more
yeah,
professionals. And
yeah. It is, but that's when you uh, actually structure your documentation. What is for end user? What is for developer? What is for well, that's what we have at WordPress. But there can be uh, documentation for project managers. For there is documentation for people who are teaching how to use WordPress, and that's what training team is working. So you know, writing for for mixed audience is probably the first thing you should fix. Not don't do that. You write documentation for a specific audience, and make sure to have the right vocabulary, the right tone for that audience. And it if you need to cover for another audience, just split it, put it on a different place, and then use a different vocabulary there.
that's true. Yes, I mean I fully understand the problem, and also WordPress is a great example here because it covers so many groups of people. Uh, some of them are, let's say, code, just developers of some source, PHP or JavaScript, that doesn't count, that doesn't matter. And on the other hand, we have a lot of people who are no code. We have a lot of polyglots that are translators. We have people who are learning, or sorry, that are teaching
Hmm.
WordPress, and the documentation has to be different. But
And there is documentation for contributors, so how to
oh, that's
contribute
true.
to. So different audiences need to have their different places where they can
Hmm.
read about it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is no chance for creating one documentation for all. It's just impossible.
Mm.
I mean, in a small project that is really doing just one thing, it's much easier to create such a universal documentation because it will be small. And this, but when we are talking about bigger and bigger projects, we have
But
to.
take it from your own perspective.
Mhm,
If you need to read to use this documentation, and you are, however small project is, when
mhm.
you see a short page, don't you just joy over that?
True,
Yeah.
true.
And
Yeah.
isn't it frustrating when you get to read something that doesn't concern you? You didn't come there to get that. So even if it's a small project, even if it's maybe easier, I would again say split it for different audience types. Just split it, put it in different place, and everybody will be much happier.
Hmm. Yeah, that has sense. Ryan Walter mentioned one thing. The Gutenberg project has a custom
Yes.
parser tool that can ingest type notation. So to help with the answer of the previous question. And Molly is asking, is good changelog a documentation?
Yes. Even bad changelog is bad documentation, but changelog is definitely documentation. Yeah.
Oh, I fully agree. I mean, for me, changelogs is always one of the most important docs when I'm using something for a longer time and I want to see, well, what changed.
Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
is nothing worse to see, especially on Android market, small changes. Cool. I learned a lot.
Bug
Thank you so
fixes.
much.
Yeah, bug
Bug
fixes.
fixes, yes, bug
Yeah.
fixes, small changes or something like this. So yeah, this is really useless. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we answered everything. So Milana, thank you so much. Also, at the start of the webinar, we started also a poll. Do you document your code? And good news is that 65% said yes, we do.
Yay. Awesome.
34%, well, I mean, 35th, probably there is something in the equation. So yeah, but still, the main,
I would like to invite those people who don't document their code to come to the documentation team, and we will teach them how to document.
and this is really a great offer. And if you all are interested, really just contact Milana. She is a really great teacher and a really fun one. I can vouch for that. So for sure, uh, it won't be a boring lesson. I can, like I said, I can vouch for this.
We have
And
cookies at least.
exactly, that's true.
Yeah.
And also, it's worth to mention that next week, I mean, in 2 weeks, we will be having Frank van der Herten, who will help us to fix bugs in PHP using the Ray debugger. There will be, well, a lot of debugging, and it will be really cool and really interesting. Also, don't forget to join to our meetup group called Buddy CI/CD Group. It's a great place to get informed about incoming webinars. And if you like this webinar, don't forget to click subscribe on our YouTube channel. Um, you will also be informed about all the webinars, and there are some more interesting tutorials and videos. So it's a really great place to learn a bit about CI/CD. So Milana, thank you so much for
Thank you.
explaining a thing or two about good and bad documentation, and that it's an endless process. So this might not be the happiest information people might learn from it, but that's true. That's true. And yeah, so I hope that we will have a chance to do some other webinar in some time. We'll think about something for sure, right?
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for watching us. Have a great day. See ya.
Bye.